Good evening and welcome to Season 1, Episode 2 of the Musky Monday Seminar Series. My name is John Anderson and I'm going to be your host for this adventure over the next 20 weeks. This is a weekly live event that brings together experienced voices of all facets of the musky world to share their knowledge and their experience about our favorite addiction and passion, musky fishing. This is everything musky right here. So I look forward to going on this journey with you. I'm really excited about today's show. It's a great place to start for our second episode. We have Brent Bochuk as our guest today. Brent's the host of the new multi-species TV and YouTube show, Setting the Hook. He's the owner of NV Charters. And today's topic is Musky 101. Making every cast count. So we're going to go through the equipment, the setup, the basic thought process that you're putting into your days out on the water, how to stay safe, a whole bunch more. I've seen this one a bunch of times and it's a good one. So I'm really looking forward to sharing the stage with Brent. We'll introduce him and tell you a little bit more about his world a few minutes from now. I always start out my broadcast by saying thank yous. So I want to say thank you to you, first of all. We had an overwhelming response to our first episode last week. We had a couple thousand views. We've had a couple hundred comments and questions. And so, wow, hopefully we find something, we found something that you like here. This program is driven by you. Your questions throughout each episode, questions that come to you after each episode. If you send them in, even if we don't put them on the screen or deal with them day by day, I promise we'll get to them and we will send you a personal answer for everything that's reasonable that comes up. Because of the response last week, we realized that we have a lot to learn about technology. I'm a certified technologist in a tougher road, and I'm so glad to have some other people to help. We have a broadcast manager and some new software. We have a better camera this week, hopefully a better microphone. We still have a few bugs to work out. Apparently I say the real John Anderson on my yeah, okay, I see it. And that was from testing today. That is nothing political whatsoever. We don't do politics here. We only do fun, entertainment, and musky stuff. So that's what that is. Behind the scenes, we have Lisa Goodyear. And if the technology looks like it's supposed to, Lisa's going to magically appear. Imagine that. Look at us, almost like we know what we're doing. Lisa's a phenomenal guide going into her third season with the Musky Factory. She helps us in so many ways, and she's going to produce a great show for you today and every week, hopefully for the next while. So thanks, Lisa. Nice to see you.
Good to see you.
Okay. And I can barely hear you guys, you and Brent. That's the only technology issue I think we have so far. I'm sure we'll build a list as we go. I need to say thank you to our team at the Ottawa River Musky Factory and Musky Factory Baits. They're going to be joining the broadcast and answering questions as we go through the show and after as well. So that's Mike Kadura, going into his 5th year as a guide, a wealth of knowledge, phenomenal catch rate. Mike Spratt, everything you want to know about baits and fixing them. How they work. He's here for your questions. Anthony Sapiano will probably join us before too long on an episode and answer some questions as we go as well. So lots of people behind the scenes. Thanks. I need to say thank you to Shimano. This is Shimano's 100th year. I am very proud to be on the Shimano Pro staff. I've been there for a bunch of years. It is an amazing team of people. Shimano drives the technology. In my opinion, Shimano drives the technology in the fishing world, and especially in the musky world. So getting to test and play with all of their new stuff and participate in that and hang out with all the great people I do. Thank you to Shimano. I always say thank you to Andre Lalone Marine. Andre is the mechanic behind my boat. I break a lot of things on my boat. He's the best boat guy that I have ever had. He's out in Wendover. He turns things around magically fast, and he's a really nice guy. I want to say thank you to Suick Lures. One of the first lures I ever had in my tackle box, my musky tackle box, back in the 70s was a Suick. And to this day, I still catch a ton of fish on a Suick. Proud to say that we are going to become a Suick dealer in the next 3 to 4 weeks. If everything goes well with getting stuff across the border, we're going to be the home of the Franken Suick. You guys know this bait already. It's been around for a couple years. It's tough to get here in Canada. We're going to have them all the time. And this was a game changer for so many people. I know this season, especially in the fall, it gets more and more use as you go to the end of the year. Brent is a fellow Suick pro staffer. We've got some incredible footage of Franken Suick fish, and he'll tell you how it's been a game changer for you too. So thanks to Suick. And I always say thank you to Muskies Canada. Muskies Canada's been a big part of my life for 25 years. There isn't a better place to learn about everything musky and a better group of people to hang out with. Muskies Canada drive more research than any other organization in this country and maybe in North America. So I really like that. On the Muskies Canada logo, it says sport fishing research from the time they were formed almost 50 years ago. And that's so important to give back to our fishery, to manage our fishery, and to keep learning about it. Muskie Factory Baits likes the research driven through Muskies Canada so much. We donate $2 from every bait that we sell directly to research. We leverage that with other individuals. And we look forward to sponsoring an awful lot of research over the next 30 years. We started last year, and it's just going to keep going from there. So all of those groups, kudos to them. The Musky Monday seminar series schedule. I got to tell you what's coming up in the next couple of weeks. Really excited next week to have an outside the box program. It's called Cutting the Learning Curve. The learning curve in the musky world is a really steep one. You know, when you fish all day for one fish, and that's success. The learning curve to get that one fish and be successful, and hopefully 4 or 5 fish. It's a pretty steep learning curve. So we're bringing Frank Ungaro from the Ugly Pike onto the show. I've known Frank since he started the Ugly Pike podcast series. He's created an incredible in-depth library of interviews with a who's who of guides, celebrities, researchers, biologists, people, bait builders, people who really know the business, and he's gone in depth with all kinds of them. He's learned a great deal. His learning curve has just gone like this the past couple of years. And I see I'm frozen on my screen, hopefully not on your screen. But anyway, really excited to have Frank here and talk about what he's learned from interviewing all these people. We're also going to have Dave Belil from the Muskies Canada Hamilton chapter. He's going to tell you about some of the learning that's done inside of a fishing club, inside of a Muskies Canada chapter. So Dave's got a really great thing going in Hamilton. We look forward to him. January 25th, JP DeRose, one of my Shimano brothers. JP is the smartest guy I have come across in terms of technology, fishing specs. You can't hold up a piece of equipment that he doesn't know backwards and forwards, inside and out. And he knows the physics behind everything and the why in terms of design. So really looking forward to having JP here. And you can find JP producing the Renegade Bass Show now and a whole bunch of other shows historically. Noah Clark and Bryn Roach are going to come here on February 1st. They don't know that yet, but we agreed they'd come, and I hope that date works for you guys. We're going to do an everything crankbait show, and those are two of the best bait builders in the game, my Canadian bait building brothers. Can't wait to do that one. We're going to do a jerk bait show soon after that, a soft plastic show, and our list of guests include Pete Bowman, Big Jim, RJ, Jamie Pastilli, Lisa and Mike are going to be on, Wally Robbins. The list goes on. So looking forward to having you join us for the next 20 weeks of Musky Mondays. It's time to introduce our guest for today, Brent Bochuk. Now, Brent's, I told you I'm really excited for a whole bunch of reasons to have Brent here at the show. I've known Brent as a friend. I've known Brent as a fishing partner. I've known him as a seminar partner at different shows. He hosts some of the big outdoor events around. He's a multifaceted guy, and he's a multi-species expert as well. So he brings a real diversity of knowledge to the game today. He's got a presentation that I've seen before. I think he did it the first time at the last Canadian Musky Odyssey. Boy, don't we all look forward to another one of those, hopefully before too long. And I know Brent was supposed to talk at the one last year with me. Hopefully we're both at the next one coming up, but we've got him here today to share his wealth of knowledge with us. So Lisa, can you invite Brent into the studio at this time?
I'm there, John. How are you?
Fantastic, Brent. Wow, look at that. Brent Bochuk out of nowhere. Really great to have you here joining us this week, Brent. What are you going to talk to us about?
Well, first of all, John, I want to thank you for inviting me. It's a real honor to be on the Musky Monday seminar series here. We're going to be talking the basics of musky fishing, Musky 101. We're going to talk about rods and reels, difference between different gear ratios, what kind of bait you're going to pull with different gear ratios, a bit about baits, of course. One of my favorite things that I've just started talking about is making every cast count. How important that is, whether you're just starting in musky fishing or if you're a seasoned musky angler. It's just so important. I know when we fished together back in the fall, we talked about that, and it's just as important to make that last cast of the count, or pardon me, that last cast of the day count as much as that first cast of the day, because you just never know, when that muskie is going to strike. So, and then we're going to talk about a little bit about fish handling and release techniques as well.
Fantastic, and maybe we'll cover a little bit of safety for the new people as well. I know Lisa's got a photo that she's going to throw up from our fishing adventure that'll kick off a little bit of a safety talk later for the new people too. So, and as you go through your presentation, I want to let everybody out there know, send in your questions as they occur to you. Lisa's going to put up some of the better questions that we can discuss together, and Brent's got his presentation broken down into a bunch of smaller sections, so we won't just keep talking at you. We'll make this as interactive as possible. Bring your questions in and use that as the base for our discussion. So why don't you take it away, Brent? Can't wait.
All right, thank you very much, John. Like I said, I really appreciate it. So I hope everybody is sitting at home and relaxed and enjoy this presentation tonight. As John mentioned, if you have any questions, please fire them off to Lisa right away, or just post them or however they're picking them up, and she'll pass them on to me. So just to let's reintroduce myself again a little bit here. I've been fishing muskie for probably 35 years now. I think I started when I was 18. So if you do a little bit of quick math, you can figure that out, how old I am. But it really doesn't seem that long. John was talking about Suiks here a little bit ago. I bought my first Suik at Sears in Hamilton at Lime Ridge Mall, and I actually have it right here. This is it. It's caught a lot of fish. It's retired now. It hangs on my wall just over here. But they've been a great bait over the years for me. And we're talking about that Franken Suik. We'll talk a little bit about that later as well. But a multi-species guide, have a bigger boat on Lake Ontario, 25.5-foot boat on Lake Ontario. We do salmon stuff out of. And then I run my low, a 19-foot low for all my musky stuff. So up in the Kawarthas and wherever else we venture to. So if anybody ever wants to get a hold of me, I'm an easy guy to get a hold of. I'm on Facebook, of course. You can always get a hold of me through my website at fishenvy.ca. So, but anyways, we were going to talk muskies. So it's kind of cool at being on right now in January, because usually I'm at the boat show right now. And at the boat show, I get to do approximately 6 seminars throughout the fishing seminars throughout the boat show. I've done a few walleye ones, but usually I'm doing the muskie one, because that's where the passion is for muskie fishing. So so it's really great to be here talking muskie tonight, especially seeing we're going to be missing our shows this year. So let me figure this out here. There we go. So we're talking Musky 101. So we're going to be talking rods, reels, lines, leaders, baits, different techniques with those baits. We're going to be talking landing a fish, handling fish, and releasing a fish safely. And I said one of my favorite parts is making every cast count. My favorite subjects on this whole presentation. So first of all, especially part of this is going to be for the new musky angler, and then. But it's all a good refresher for everybody. So when we're talking musky rods, obviously we're talking something heavier than a bass or a walleye rod. Musky rods come in different actions. For the most part, you're going to be looking at a heavy, an extra heavy, or a double extra heavy. And that's not the difference between a heavy or an extra heavy for landing a fish isn't important. The weight of that rod, whether it's heavy, extra heavy, or whatever, is for the bait that you're throwing. So if you're throwing a big if you're throwing big rubber baits here, like this curly Sue, then you're going to be using a heavier rod. When you're throwing blades, you're throwing blades like a double eight or whatever, you can use a bit of a lighter rod. So maybe a heavy, where with the big rubber, you're throwing an extra heavy or a double extra heavy, depending on the size of it. But one of the big things you'll notice is the handle length on these rods. I like to use a rod that has about a 14-inch handle. 12 to 14 inches. Anything less than that is a little difficult, because you want one hand at the bottom and you want one hand on the reel itself, at the reel. And you want to be able to use that leverage for casting. So the longer handle also, when you're reeling in, it's going to be under your arm. It's not going to be poking you right in the ribs. Get the angle right there. So you got one hand at the bottom, one hand here on the reel. And you're going to be able to fire those casts up. If this is too short, it's going to be very awkward. The longer this is, 14 inches is perfect. It's going to allow you some leverage when you're casting. And then also, you can get that rod right under your arm here, so that it's not poking you in the ribs. It's going underneath your arm instead. Now if we go to our next slide. So if you notice in the slide here, if you can see the rod, how the rod is bent, that rod is actually loaded up. So you're actually using the action in the rod, the energy that's created when you come back on your back cast, using that energy to help throw your bait forward. You don't have to put a lot of effort into it. You don't want to be using your shoulders when you're casting. I get a lot of people on my boat and they start, first thing in the morning, they're using their shoulders and everything to make a big cast. You're going to wear yourself out. If you got 8 to 10 hours out in the water in a day, you want to make sure that you're ready physically as well as mentally in that last hour as you are in the first hour of the day. So what you'll notice here is, the rod's going to load up with the weight of the lure, and all you're really doing is moving your arms just a little bit, just bending your elbows almost, coming back, feeling the rod load up, and going forward, and letting that energy help throw the rod. We got a little video here. I'm going to play this video a couple times actually. So you can see John's on the left side, I'm on the right. When I cast here, it's actually in slow motion. You can be able to see the bend in the rod real well. So at the end of a cast, I'm watching in the water, watching for a follow, making a boat side maneuver. And as I throw that Frankenstroke there, I'm not putting a lot of effort into that. I'm moving the rod, of course, but using the energy in the rod to throw that bait. Okay, that'll stop. So we're going to watch this again. We're going to watch John cast, and then we're going to watch my cast. And we're going to see the energy in the rod that's created. But if you're using the right action rod for the weight of the bait, you'll notice when that bait's flying through the water, it's actually nice and straight. If you're using your rod with maybe a too fast of a tip for the weight of your rod, it might fling your bait on you, and you'll actually tumble in the air. You want that bait to fly out nice and straight. So grab your different rods, throw different baits on them, figure out which rod is the best for the baits that you're using. So if I can, so there we go. See John's rod there? He's came on his back cast. The rod's loaded up. Oops, go back a little bit there. See, he's gone a little bit farther there. His arms haven't moved very much at all. But look at all that energy in his rod. I think he's got either 9 or 12, a 10 or a 12-inch Suic on there. And then as he goes forward, his arms, he doesn't use his shoulders at all there. It's just his arms, just his forearms and his elbows moving and using that energy in the rod. So that we go a little farther here. I don't have much of a back cast on this, but when I come back, you can start to see that rod load up. As I start to go forward, it's the weight of the lure and my momentum going forward that's actually creating the energy in that rod. It's bending that rod. And as I get forward here, what happens is it's cast the bait out, and you can see it flying through the air there. It's pretty straight. It's not flipping. It's not flopping. It's not cartwheeling or anything. And that's very important because we want to make every cast count. If there's a big fish in between where I casted and the boat, and my lure gets tangled up in the line as I'm casting it out, well, that's a wasted cast. There's no chance of catching that fish. So we want to make sure we make every cast count. And I'm going to repeat that phrase throughout my presentation, making every cast count, because when you're out in the water next season, I want you to think about that when you're on the water. I want you to think, I got to make every cast count. I want to make sure you think that, because if that's in your head, you're going to put more effort into making every cast count. And by the end of the season, it will help you put a few more fish in the boat. Okay. So when I first started musky fishing, if you had an Abu Garcia 6500, that was the musky reel. That was the biggest musky reel out there when I first started musky fishing. It was a round reel. Nowadays, as you can see in this picture here, it's a low profile reel. Some guys still use a round reel. I prefer a low profile. It's like a bass reel on steroids. It's a lot bigger, but it's a lot easier on the hands. If you have kids out fishing, they have smaller hands. If you have smaller hands, it's just a lot easier to hold on to these reels now. One of the nice things is you can crank with the everything they put in the reels over the years. You can crank these drags right down. Most musky reels between 25 and 29 pounds of drag. I crank my drags down as tight as I can, pretty much. I don't want to be setting the hook and having any drag come out. When I make that solid hook set, I want everything to be solid. We're using braided line nowadays, which has very low stretch, maybe about 1%, 1 to 3% stretch, maybe. Got the drag locked down. When I set that hook, I want those hooks going real solid. A couple of different things with these reels now. You can see on that reel on your screen, there's a star drag on there. So you can crank your drag down there. And then also there's that little button on the side. That tightens and loosens your spool. If you're new to a bait casting rod, crank that down. Crank it down. You're not going to be able to cast as far, but you're not going to get the backlashes. As you get a little more experience, back that little knob off, loosen off your drag a little bit. What I like to tell people is if they haven't used a bait caster before, cast out as far as you can, pull another 10, 15 feet of line off, and then take about a 2 or 3 inch strip of electrical tape, put it on your spool, and wind it on there. What's going to happen later on, if you do get a backlash, it's only going to go down to where that tape is. It's not going to go all the way down and ruin your whole spool of line. Braid's expensive. It's not cheap. So if we can preserve that line behind there, you're going to save yourself a bit of money. You're going to save yourself a lot of frustration. It's going to be a lot quicker to get that backlash out, and you're going to get fishing that much sooner. One of the big things that have came out in musky reels since I first started musky fishing, at least, is a high gear ratio and a low gear ratio. So these are the examples off of Revo Toro Beast. So the high gear ratio is 6:2 to 1, which is going to give you approximately 31 inches of line for every time you turn that handle around once. A low gear ratio of 4.9 to 1 is going to give you 27 inches of line. So take a look at your musky reels and see what your gear ratio is. It's a lot easier to throw blades like these double 10s here. Those double 10s, they have a lot of resistance. You're pulling crankbaits, they have a lot of resistance. It's a lot easier to use a low gear ratio for that. If I'm throwing a Suic where I want to pick up, or a jerk bait where I want to pick up my line real quick, I give it a pull, I want to pick up that line real quick before I give it another pull, I'm going to use a high gear ratio. When it comes to fighting fish, you probably won't notice a difference on it, but when you're retrieving baits, you'll definitely know the difference. If you start throwing a blades with a high gear ratio, you're going to have to work a lot harder to get those blades moving and get them back to the boat. Line. When I first started musky fishing, we had two choices. We had monofilament and we had Dacron line. Monofilament, maybe about 30% stretch in it. Dacron line, we thought it was pretty much stretch proof. We didn't get any stretch, but in all reality, we had about 15% stretch in that. So nowadays we have these super braids. We get maybe 1 to 3% stretch. Just for an example, on this Berkley X9, you have one carrier and you have one core and 8 carries on it. The X5, you have one core and 4 carriers. The difference in those lines is the carriers and the core on the X5 are a lot thicker, so that's a lot stiffer line. I might use that if I was bass fishing, flipping and pitching and stuff like that. But I'm going to use the X9 because it's a lot more limber when I'm casting. So if I'm casting musky baits, I'm going to go with something like the X9. So when you're looking at your line, you're going to go out and buy some braided line. That's something to take into consideration is how limber it is. If it's a stiff line, like I said, I'm going to use it when I'm flipping or pitching for bass and around pads and whatnot. But for musky fishing, I like the X9. One thing with braided line, though, you have to watch, and we all get it, and we all have to deal with it. You get fray on it. And what happens when that line gets frayed, water absorbs into it, and that's when it breaks down. So after a few hours of musky fishing, take a look at your line. If it's frayed off, cut 2 or 3 feet off, whatever it is. We got a whole spool of line there. It's nothing to cut 2 or 3 feet off when you get a fray in there. The last thing you want to do is be out musky fishing, hook a fish, and because you didn't check your line and you had frays on it, and you lose a fish, not only do you lose a fish, you're losing a bait, and there's a possibility that bait is still stuck in the fish's mouth, and that's never any good when you lose a bait. You have a fish swimming away with a bait in it. So one thing you want to do is check your line, make sure you don't have abrasions on it, and you're good to go. Okay, leaders.
We had a. If I can just jump in for a second, Brent. We had a question come up a moment ago about pound test. I think Steve was asking what pound test is common for us, and sort of the minimum that we would use is 80, and I often put 100-pound test on a reel. The thicker braid that you put on a reel, the less trouble you have with it, and the easier it is to undo birds' nests if you do get them. But as reel technology changes year by year, it's almost impossible. It gets harder and harder to get birds' nests on these reels. I mean, if you haven't thrown the technology and the reels these days changes so fast that if you're throwing a reel that's 3 or 4 years old, it's almost out of date in terms of being able to do everything better, and especially in the bird's nest category, which we're talking about magnets on the inside and other technologies.
Yeah, that's I like that. Thanks for that question, Steve. I do have rods with 100-pound test on them, and I have rods with 80-pound test. I prefer 80-pound test myself. Nothing lighter than that, but I do prefer 80-pound test because I can cast a little bit farther with it. But John, you're 100% bang on. When you have people that, if you're not used to using a bait caster, put on that 100 to start with, because when you do get a backlash, and you know what, it doesn't matter how long you've been fishing, we all get one every now and then. And the nice thing is, it's so much easier to get out when that happens. We have another question there. What leader do you recommend for Blake? Oh, that's a good. Actually, we're just getting into. We're just going to talk about leaders there, Jason. So we're going to talk about leaders I use for blades, for bucktail or for jerk baits and that kind of stuff. So, all right. So for the most part, I like steel leaders. I do use fluorocarbon leaders every now and then, but casting leaders anywhere 9 to 12 inches long. While I'm trolling, I'll go up to about a 40-inch leader. I will use fluorocarbon leaders for trolling, especially in clear water. If I'm in a situation where I'm bouncing bottom or there's a lot of structure, I'm just going to go with steel leader. I do make my own steel leaders out of old downrigger cable. They're a little bit thicker. I haven't had an issue with them. I have made some up for casting as well out of that, but I do like the leaders that Suick makes. If you can see that there, hey, Lisa, can you put me on there? So these are the leaders that I like. There we go. They're a solid steel leader. As you can see, they're about 9 inches long, and they're really good for jerkbait. But one thing I like doing with them, I have a few jerkbaits that I pull off the wall down here. A couple of Suicks. This one's been eaten a few times. But what I like to do is I like to take a little bit of heat shrink on there. See right there, there's heat shrink, so it's solid. Here's how they come out of the package. There's no heat shrink on there. What that does is about an inch of heat shrink. You can get it at most tackle shops don't carry it. If you can find it at a tackle shop, get it there. If not, automotive department Canadian Tire has them. But you notice you don't have a pivot point here now, so it's less likely when I pull this jerkbait through the water when it's gliding. If I don't get my line picked up quick enough, there's very little chance that's going to cut on my hooks. Well, here's one without the heat shrink on it. If I pull this through the water, the leader falls and that bait keeps gliding. If I don't pick it up, there is a possibility that you can get that caught on the hooks. If that happens, you're not making that cast count. You may have just spent 8 hours fishing, casted that bait into the perfect spot with the perfect fish sitting there, and you just screwed it up. You didn't make it count when those hooks get caught. So all I do is I put a little bit of heat shrink on there, take a lighter, heat it up, and now that there's no swivel point there anymore. I will use a fluorocarbon leader when I'm throwing big rubber baits. And the reason is every now and then, if it tumbles on you and gets caught up in the leader, you can take these, you can tie them in a bow, you can tie them in a knot, and they're not going to kink on you. A solid wire leader will kink on you with big rubber, especially it hits the water, you go to give it a pull, all that weight, you're going to kink it. So I will use fluorocarbon leaders when I'm throwing big rubber baits. For blades, I'll either use the fluorocarbon or straight steel leader. I haven't noticed any difference in hooking percentage or the amount of fish I catch, whether I'm using fluorocarbon or steel leader. Big thing is for using a steel leader, make sure you take them, and if they do get bent up on you, straighten them out the best you can. If they get too kinked up on you, throw them out, cut the hardware off, and tie another one on. You got a leader to show us there, John?
I was just gonna, that's great advice on the glide bait leaders, especially when you're starting out, because a glide bait is such a finesse bait, and the glide baits, that goes for top water glide baits. It also goes for your baits under the surface, and so that straight wire leader, when you're new and you're developing your touch with your fishing rod, keeps you out of trouble, and it just makes it so much easier to walk your bait. To walk the dog with your bait correctly. As a more experienced angler, I'm a one-trick pony, and so as you get more experience with your rod and your touch is better, and you're able to develop the action that you want through the manipulation of your rod, I'm trying to be more efficient. So I know with a short fluoro leader like this is a Musky Factory baits leader. I put this on and I take this off 6 or 8 weeks later when it gets kinks in it. So this is, my top water, my glide, my jerk, my inlet, my everything leader. And so, there's a graduation through it. This is a one size fits all. There are definitely better tools at different times for sure. So nice job, Brent.
Thank you. Okay, we have another question there. I can see there's a question on the screen, but I can't quite read it. Are leaders necessary? Oh, sorry.
Jump in here. Sorry. So Travis is wondering, are leaders necessary? I've never used one before.
I would never go personally, I would never go musky fishing without a leader. And there's a number of reasons. One, you do have to worry about the teeth. Muskies have razor sharp teeth. Walleye have teeth as well, but they're pointy. They're sharp on top, or they're pointed like a cone. Muskie and pike, they're like razor blades. They're not only pointy on top, but they're sharp on the sides. Another reason I want to use a leader is if a fish rolls up in your line, he's gonna, you can get cut off on the gill plate, and also it's a lot easier on the muskie itself rolling on the leader than it is on the thinner line. So it's safer for your fish as well using a leader. And I would never go muskie fishing without a leader, and I'm pretty sure you wouldn't either, John?
I'd like to add something to your answer, Brent. That was excellent. Travis, great question. And there's a basic philosophy that maybe we should explain right off the bat on all the reason behind all the equipment that we use. Every fish is sacred in muskie fishing. That fish swimming away is the single most important thing that happens after we catch it. And swimming back in great shape, and able to reproduce and continue to contribute to the muskie population. This is the apex predator. There's not a lot of them. They live for 30 years, and they're not very efficient spawners. So, causing 1 or 2 or 3 fish to die in a particular area, through bad handling or angling mistakes, it just can't happen. So all the equipment that Brent's talking about, why the rods are so heavy, why the reels are so powerful, we use 80 and 100-pound tests so that we have a short, intense fight with a fish. We could just as easily put on 12 or 16-pound tests and hook up one of those big fish and have the fight of a lifetime with a fish that's 20 years old or 25 years old. But the reality is that fish is a lot of times going to swim away to die. So if we had a fishery built on catching muskies with improper equipment, we would damage it. We would destroy it very quickly. So everything that we do is to mitigate the stress that we put on the muskie through the fight and through the handling, and for the fish. That's our prime directive.
Okay, that's that's a really good point, John. Also, when we talk about we're talking about handling fish and that, I know years ago I used to hear people say, "Oh, the fish had really pretty red fins on it." Well, if you get a fish with red fins, that's blood. It's from stress. It's blood coming through the fins and that. So, as you're saying, it's very important to get that fish to the boat as quickly as we can, and to ensure a safe release. But let's talk a little bit about baits. As you can see on this slide there, I got a couple of some baits there. I got some jerk baits. I got big rubber baits, and I got some blades. Yeah, there's lots of different types of jerk baits out there. I just happen to love throwing suics. I do throw other jerk baits, but for the most part, when I'm guiding, if I have 2 people in the boat, two out of these 3 baits are in the water at all times. I'm going to have a big rubber bait. I'm going to have blades going, and throughout the day, we're going to have jerk baits going. At some time throughout the day, all 3 of these baits will be in the water. So when we're talking jerk baits, what we want to do is, can you put me back on there, Lisa? So we're talking jerk. What you do for a jerk bait is what you do with your rod tip. So if I take this bait here, I cast it out, and I pull it through the water, it's just going to go like that. It's not going to look very attractive at all. Probably not going to catch a fish on it. So as soon as the jerkbait hits the water, you want to give it a pull. These ones here are designed, they're going to dive down. On that slack line, they're going to rise up. It's going to dive down again. So it's a dive and rise presentation, dive and rise. And what's that doing is it's imitating an injured bait fish. No, not all jerk baits you can alter, but the suics you can. The suic thriller here, see this tail on the back, that middle tail there? That actually, when you pull through the water actually hits that back tail, and that's what makes it dive down through the water column. So if I bend it a little bit less, it's not going to dive quite as deep. I bend it more, it's going to dive deeper. You bend it too much, it's just going to pop up on you. So you can play with that to make sure that you get the right depth you want, you get the right action you want. Every now and then you'll get a soak especially after you catch a fish on it, it might kick off to the side on you. That's not necessarily a bad thing. You got to remember, muskie like to grab their prey from the head. If I look at all my wooden baits that I have, or plastic baits, most of them are all chewed up at the head before the body starts to get chewed up. And that's what I said. They like to grab it by the head. If they grab it by the tail back here, they got to turn that bait to swallow it. So it's a lot easier for them to grab it head first so they can swallow it head first. So when that muskie's following this bait, if it kicks off to the side, that's an opportunity for that fish to rush that bait and grab it. Otherwise, what he's going to do is he's going to come up beside it and turn to try and grab it by the head. But if it's kicking off to the side and you don't want it to, sometimes the eye in the front here, sometimes that'll get twisted on you, especially after you got a fish in the net. Your leader gets caught in the net, hooks get caught in the net. Also, sometimes the hook guides here, the hook wires, they'll get twisted on you. Sometimes, given those little tweaks, you can actually straighten your bait out. Or if you want it to kick off to the side, you can bend your tail on a bit of an angle. So play with it, experiment with it, find an action that you like, and make sure you throw them with confidence. Now, I was looking in the garage earlier today. We're talking blades. When I first started musky fishing, this was a blade here. This is a little Meps musky killer. It's got a small blade on it. It's got bucktail, little hair off a deer on there. It's not very big, not compared to say a double 10. A little while later, we started getting bucktails with bigger blades on. That's about a number 8 blade. This is actually a fuzzwubby. I don't know if anybody's ever heard of fuzzwubby before. I caught a lot of fish back in the day on this bait here. You can see it doesn't have a lot of hair left on it. This was my favorite, gold blade with a little green and black on there. And nowadays, we got 8s and we got 10s that we throw a lot of. It's got all that fancy flashaboo on there. Blades just came a long ways. One of the very important things when you're throwing blades are, I like to use my reel and stop it before it hits the water. I'll cast out. Where are we here? I'll cast out and I'll use my thumb to stop the bait before it hits the water. Just before it hits the water, I stop it. I engage my spool. So I cast it out, stop it, hits the water, engage my spool. So as soon as it hits the water, I got those blades rolling right away. Quite often, musky will hit on the first 10 feet and the last 10 feet of a cast. Especially in stained water, dirty water situations, you get a lot more boat side strikes. But you want to make sure when this hits the water, you get those blades going. Because what happens is you cast that bait out, and if there's a musky in the area, he's curious. He hears a splash. He's probably going to look up at it. If this blade starts going right away, you got a chance of catching that fish, especially out of a reaction strike, out of instinct. If it hits the water and just kind of flutters down, he's going to see that. It's not going to look natural. He's going to lose interest in it pretty quick. So you always want to stop the blades before they hit the water, engage your spool, get them rolling right away. And no matter what kind of bait you're throwing, that last 10 feet is just as equally as important as the first 10 feet. You can get bit anywhere on a cast. It doesn't have to be the first or last 10 feet. Otherwise, we just make 20-foot casts. So you get close to the boat. Always keep your eyes peeled. Watch your bait coming in. I tell people to look behind the bait and below the bait. A foot behind the bait and a foot below the bait. I want you looking in the water, looking through the surface, watching for a fish coming in. And always make a boat side maneuver. We call it figure eights. It could be a big circle. You get to the boat. I leave about 2 or 3 inches of line out before I hit my leader. I start going into a figure eight, keeping the bait in the water. If you're going into an 8, I always bring the bait if I'm bringing it from the right to the left. Sorry, from the right, I've been towards the boat to the left. So my outside of the 8, the outside of the 8 is always going away from the boat. A lot of these fish will hit on the corners. I don't want to be bringing the end of the 8 towards the boat and have a fish hit. I have nowhere to set the hook. And that fish is also coming towards the boat then. So if he hits as he's going away from the boat, it's a lot easier to keep that fish moving. That's another thing. We'll see in a little video I have here later. You get a fish at boat side, you have to keep that fish moving. You can't set the hook the fish hits a boat side, set the hook and just stand there and hold on. You have to keep the fish moving forward. That way you're keeping pressure on that fish all the time. Remember, you only have a couple feet of line out, if that. So you got to keep that fish moving forward to keep pressure on him. Otherwise, he's going to start shaking his head and you're going to get some slacking and you're going to lose him. The last one that we're going to talk about is big rubber baits. This is a curly Sue here. This is I think it's 9 or 11 inch one plus the tail. These baits are great. You can work them a variety of different ways. One, you can cast it out on a straight retrieve, and you're going to get vibration off this tail. It's going to be going through the water, vibrating as it curls behind it. I like to work them like a jerk bait. I love throwing jerk baits when I pick up a big rubber bait like this. I'll work it like a jerk bait, so I'm going to give it a pull, and it's actually going to take a nosedive, and I'm going to give it a pull. It's going to take a nosedive. So remember, the Sue hook would be a dive and a rise, a dive on an angle, then rise straight up. The difference is when I'm working a big rubber bait like a jerk bait, it's going to come up on an angle, and when it's got that bit of slack line, it's actually going to drop straight down. The weight of that nose is going to drop straight down. So it's a totally different action. It's working it like a jerk bait, but you get a lot different action. And I think, John, you called this a CSI bait when we were out back in October. It was a brand new bait. I thought I had a hit. We looked at it, and you called it CSI bait. You can see we got some marks on it there, but we didn't get the fish. That's the only problem with big rubber baits. When you think you might have had a hit and you don't hook up, you can look at your bait and go, "Oh yeah, I had a hit and I just screwed up. I didn't make that cast count." So, does anybody have questions on baits there, or what's that one say?
Fantastic. But while we're waiting for Lisa to put another question up, I'll just offer a couple of comments to new people. The one thing that you can do to make any reel that you have more efficient is to make sure that it is full to the top, full for capacity of line. And so if you look at this reel right here, and I can't see myself in a monitor, but this is as low as I would let a reel get with line. This is a reel I took off of one of my rods at the end of the year. I regularly take my line off, bump up the underline that I have, I put a base layer of monofilament on, and I make sure that my line capacity is as big as it can possibly be, because, you know, the bigger the diameter of that spool, the more line you're bringing in every time, the more speed you're getting, the easier it is for your reel to work. So that's one tip that, you know, I see so many people fishing with reels that are half full, and you're just making it 15% less efficient right there. So there's one to pass on to newer people. What do we have now?
And if you don't want to fill up your spool with braid all the way, you can always put mono backing on there too. So we don't use a lot of line when we're musky fishing, really. You know, you use it a little bit more than a cast, and then it's not like a salmon where they're going to take off a whole bunch of line. So Adam, I like your question, Adam. Thank you. That's something I was thinking about the other day, and Adam's asking if when you're going into a figure eight, do you hit the free spool and keep your thumb on it? Do you loosen the drag off if you get a fish on? I don't hit my thumb spool at all. I keep the reel engaged the whole time. You set the hook. Your rod's gonna. There is a bit of give there. You might take a little bit of line off, maybe, but your rod's going to bend. That's where you got that little bit of give is going to be in the rod there. I want to set when I set the hook. When the fish grabs that bait of boat side, when I set the hook, I don't want any room for error there. If I've disengaged the spool and I got my thumb on it, there's a chance it's going to pull line off when I go to set the hook, or I might not get a solid hook set because the line's going to slip on my thumb. I keep the drag down, set the hook, and I just try to keep the fish moving forward. He's going to shake his head like crazy. The rod's going to bend a lot and jump around on you. But just keep that fish moving forward, keep your drag locked down, and if you're by yourself, it's really important to keep your know where your net is and have a game plan for when you do hook a fish. If you got a partner with you, they better be on that net real quick. if when you hook up boat side. So that's another thing. When you're paying attention, you have to be paying attention to what your partner's doing as well in the boat. And when it comes, we're going to talk about here a little bit about netting fish, actually. So, but first of all, we're going to go on to making every cast count. Actually, speaking of figure eights, that was the I always give my wife heck sometimes about not paying attention when I'm doing a seminar. So this fish here, she actually got on a figure eight. I used to tell a story about a few years back when she first started musky fishing, how she missed a big fish boat side because she pulled her bait out of the water. She goes, look at that. There's about a 46, 47-inch musky sitting there that's turned away from the boat. And then I cast it out and said, okay, when you get back to the boat, you got to go into a figure eight. And I had a blue suic on, and I go into this figure eight boat side. The fish actually came out snapping at the bait. And I'm actually probably the only musky I'm glad I didn't catch, because I would have been in a lot of trouble. But this one she got last year on a figure eight boat side during the Muskies Canada family outing, actually. So how do we make every cast count? As I said, I want to repeat that, make every cast count, because I want you to make sure you think about that next year. There's a whole bunch of different ways we can make every cast count. Make sure your hooks are razor sharp. It's so important when we're musky fishing to make sure our hooks are sharp. This is a great time of year. Last year I went through all my hooks. I sat out in the garage, had the heater going, music going, and I sharpened every single hook that I had. It helped because, well, I think my hooks were extra sharp last year because we had this COVID stuff hit and a lot of things were shut down. So we're home a lot more. I spent a lot of that time preparing my baits for the upcoming season. After you catch a fish, after you've hit, even weeds will start to dull your hooks a bit. So you're contacting a lot of weeds, you hit wood, you hit rocks, you catch a fish, check your hooks. The last thing you want to do is spend all that time, money, and effort and lose a fish, or don't get a good hook set on a fish because your hooks are dull, or you got a tip that's bent over on a hook. Body positioning. This is really huge when it comes to body positioning. So you make your cast out. It doesn't matter if you're throwing a jerk bait or you're throwing blades or whatever. I always want to make sure, okay, I reel with my right hand. So I cast out. I want to have my rod in my left hand, obviously, but I want to be pulling the bait so my rod is coming across the front of my body. So if I'm throwing a jerk bait, I'm bringing it across the front, reeling up the slack, across the front, reeling up the slack, across the front of my body. What happens there is, if I get a fish hit, I got all this room. I'm on the strong side of my arm coming in to set the hook. I can also turn my body to set the hook. If I'm on my backhand and I'm working it this way, I don't have nearly as much strength to set the hook going back this way, and I can't turn my body as much because it's already turned. So body positioning for you when you're working the bait, it's going to be less fatigue on your body if you're in the right body position. But it's a big thing. It's coming across the front of your body so that when you do get that fish hit, you can set the hook solid, you can turn, you can even step. Take a step. Sometimes I've even taken a step back. I've seen myself on video before setting the hook, where I've set the hook and I've actually made a step back as well. Every little bit helps to set the hook there. So body positioning is huge. If I'm casting, if you're in the boat by yourself, it's easy. You can get be on whatever side of the boat you want. Sometimes you have to compensate with the wind, boat positioning, where your weed bed is, or your structure that you're casting to. Sometimes you got to make a little bit of compensation or whatever, but make sure that your body is in position to set the hook if you do get a strike. Being prepared. You have to be prepared from the time you make that cast, from when it hits the water till you pull that bait out of the water. You never ever know when a muskie is going to hit. As I said, a lot of the times it's the first 10 feet of the cast or the last 10 feet of a cast. So you got to be prepared the whole time, and you got to be paying attention. So paying attention and being prepared kind of the same thing. As I said earlier, John and I fished together back in October. We put in 2 long days. We ended up with 2 fish. But on the second day, it was the very last, half hour left in the day, maybe, if that. The sun was down. It was dark. And we were filming, and I just looked at the camera. I said, you know what? You got to pay attention and be as prepared in the last 10 minutes of the day as you are in the first 10 minutes of the day. I can't remember exactly what it said, but something to that effect. And no sooner than I said that, I keep casting, and we get a fish on. Well, we've already put eight or 9 hours in on the water. We were both tired. It was cold, but we knew the sun was going down. The fish were active, and there's a good chance of catching a fish there. So you got to pay attention and be prepared at all times when you're out musky fishing. Otherwise, because if you don't make those casts count, if I would have got lazy on that one cast, and maybe I wasn't paying attention or whatever, I wasn't prepared, that fish that we caught, we might not have if I wasn't paying attention or prepared. So you got to be mentally prepared the whole time, at the end of the day, as well as the beginning of the day. Accurate casting. If you fish bass and stuff like that, you're casting your own docks, you're flipping the pads, you're flipping the weeds. It's very important. Musky fishing also is important for accurate casting. A lot of the times we're fishing a weed bed, we're fishing, the edges and whatnot. We're casting it as far as we can. But there are times, especially if you're using a diving bait or a jerk bait where you're going to give it a pull and it's going to come down. If I'm 50 feet from a weed bed, it's a really thick weed bed. If I cast 55 feet, my first pull, I'm going to pull that bait down into the weeds. And then I'm going to have weeds on my, treble hooks on a bait. Treble hooks on these are going to grab a lot of weeds. So it's important to have accurate casting, more so for distance. So, everybody wears polarized sunglasses now. If you're standing up in your boat, if you can see the weed edge, you want to cast right on that weed edge if it's really thick and get your bait working as soon as it hits the water. Sometimes you can cast into the weed bed. You can cast back in a little bit, make a couple pulls, and you're okay. But it's just depending how thick that weed is. Sometimes you're fishing around wood. You want to bring your bait right past a piece of wood. Musky are going to use wood for cover every now and then. They like to ambush prey. It could be sitting beside a log. You see a log, you want to cast right beside it. You want to cast down it. So it's very important to have accurate casting as well. We have a question there. What's the Lisa? Can you read that question for me?
Sure. So Ryan's wondering, just speaking of the dive and rise baits, he's wondering once he gets to the boat side, how you impart action on the dive and rise, or if you just spin it like a blade.
Oh, thanks, Ryan. That's good. Yeah, I'm glad you asked that, Ryan. On a jerk bait, most of the time when I get to the side of the boat, I'll just keep moving that bait. I'll just go into the figure eight, just like you would blades. As long as if the fish is engaged and he's chasing that bait, I don't think at that time it's going to matter if you keep popping it. If you keep, sometimes on a figure eight, I will. If I haven't seen a fish, sometimes I'll keep jerking as I go through the water. But usually I just bring it in and just go into the figure eight or a big circle. And I don't worry about working the bait so much then. But you can. I think it's easier. We got a lot going on in our minds, especially when you got a fish following, right? You got a lot going on in your mind. It's probably easier just taking that bait and going into the figure eight with it. He's already engaged. He's close enough to it that if a fish is scared, if a bait fish is scared, he might be, scooting through the water or whatever. He's scared. All of a sudden, his attitude is going to change, right? That bait fish attitude is going to change when he realizes there's prey behind him. So it probably actually looks very, very realistic to a muskie to get close to something, and then the action change a bit. So yeah, I like to just keep going straight right into a figure eight in that respect. Good question. Thank you, Ryan. You got to start strong and finish stronger. So we've already talked about stopping the bait before it hits the water, engaging the reel and getting the bait moving, finishing strong. I know a couple of years ago I fished with John and Wally Robbins, and I made some notes when I got home, and I actually found those notes a few weeks ago. And one of them was finishing stronger at boat side. And when so we're watching behind your bait and below your bait. So you don't want to look at the water, you want to look through the water and into the water. A lot of trout guys that read trout streams, they don't look at the water, they look through the water. You kind of got to get that into your head that you're looking past the surface and down into the water. Boat side maneuver after every single cast. I know when John and I were fishing there, we were talking, John makes a blind boat side maneuver, and he had a fish hit. Fish came up, we got the fish. He didn't see the fish come in, but he automatically goes into a boat side maneuver that fish was following. As soon as he made that turn, the fish was on. So after every cast, you have to make a boat side maneuver, and don't be sloppy with it. There's no use making that big cast, working that bait all the way back to the boat, and then doing a sloppy boat side maneuver. if that fish is coming in, if John wouldn't have seen that fish, for example, and did it just a sloppy maneuver at the boat side, you may have missed that fish. He wouldn't have made that cast count. Or if he didn't make a boat side maneuver, he wouldn't have made that cast count. Fortunately, he did. We got a nice fish out of it.
On a one fish day, that was the one fish, and that's how it happens so many times, as you and I know, Brent.
Right, especially as we were talking, John, in dark or stained water, dirty water.
Yeah. I'll just add another comment on your finishing at the side of the boat and the importance of that. In just about all of my talks, I try to save people time up front as a guide. I tell you, there's two fail points for most musky fishermen out in the boat. Just about every day I watch muskies put teeth on baits that we don't get, and the fail points happen in the same place. And the first one is on the hook set. And so when Brent talks about having the drag clamp right down on the reel, that's to facilitate the hook set. And the other thing we're doing is we're pointing right at our bait as it's coming in, so that your rod tip can move from way out in front of you to way beside you. So your rod tip actually travels 10 or 12 feet. And my line to my guests is always break my skicks, break that fishing rod. That you should put all your might into that hook set. And that's, the razor sharp hooks that Brent mentioned. We sharpen hooks all day long. Every day we sharpen the same bait over and over because you're fishing for that one bite. So on the hook set, break the rod, have your drag clamp down. The other fail place where people miss fish is at the side of the boat. So I love how much you concentrated on that finish at the side of the boat explanation, Brent. And you told the story of Heather pulling the bait out of the water, and admiring the fish in there. Well, a lot of days that's your chance. That's the fish that showed up for you to catch, and you weren't ready. You didn't see it. You didn't do a big circle on the finish. You cheaped out on it. Whatever. You weren't watching in behind your bait. You weren't paying attention. So the best thing that I tell most people they can do to up their game is to improve, or to up their catch rate, is to improve their game at the side of the boat. And on that question on the dive and rise bait from a couple minutes ago, a lot of baits aren't aquadynamic necessarily. A suic is sometimes that way. And a real key is to have a very short lead of line between the end of your leader and your rod tip to right here. And then when you have your 9-foot rod, it goes way down underwater, and it doesn't matter if that bait's aquadynamic or not. If you've got that short lead, the bait has no choice but to follow your rod around, and being 3 or 4 or 5 feet under the water at the side of your boat, another good tip for new people on finishing there. Takes the eyes of the fish off of you, off of the boat. It allows them to focus on the bait a little more. So side of the boat, uber important to your catch rate.
Another thing you mentioned there, John, about pointing the rod at the bait, especially when you're pulling blades or baits that have a lot of resistance. It's a lot easier on your arm, and you're letting the reel do the work. So it keeps you a lot fresher for at the end of the day as well. You mentioned, I'll tell a quick story here. I had guys out for a half-day guide trip a couple years ago. And I hate half-day guide trips because, as you know, John, you could have that peak in the afternoon and you're out in the morning, or vice versa. So especially musky fishing, the windows are just so important. But anyways, we pull up onto this, one of my favorite weed beds. The guys showed up. They got good musky equipment and everything else. They're new to musky fishing, but they had great equipment. And they make a cast out. We're working baits. We're working. Guy gets a nice fish on, sets the hook. Fish comes up out of the water, spits the hook back at him. I'm going, oh, that might have been it. We got a 4-hour trip. We had a nice fish on. I'm hoping that's not it. We fish a couple other spots. We get 1 or 2 small fish. We come back onto that weed bed, and the guy gets a backlash. And I blame myself for this because I should have checked this earlier. But I'm getting the backlash out for him, and I go, was your drag this tight when you you had that fish head earlier? He goes, yeah, is it too tight? I said, no, I can pull a drag out. So anyway, I cranked his drag down. 5 minutes later, his buddy gets a fish, about a 36-inch fish. I grab the net, Mike's reeling it as fast as he can, and all of a sudden he goes, oh, I got one too. And so the other guy's fish is by the boat. I put the net under it. I look over, and his rod's doing one of these beside the boat. And I'm going, I just netted the wrong fish. And he had about a 45-inch tiger on. And he had his drag cranked right down. The hooks weren't buried. I don't think he got a good hook set, but I grabbed it by hand, and the hooks weren't buried. And but I think it was speed was the key for him catching that fish and having his drag crank down as well in that instance. So we have a question here about what was that? Setting the hook on a figure eight or a boat side maneuver. That's really interesting. Thanks for asking that, Jack. Now, I got a little video that we're going to see in a minute here. And when I seen this fish this time in particular, I kept going the same way that I was moving because I'd seen the fish eat the bait real good. On blades, sometimes you can come back on them to get that hook in the corner of the mouth. This was on a Susie sucker, big swim bait. I seen how far the fish had eaten that bait, so I just set the hook and kept going with the fish and kept it moving forward. Depending on your experience, really, you're going to have to be able to read that fish, how he's eating that bait. If he's got the bait good, sometimes you can go forward with it. If depending on blades, it's easier to come back to turn those hooks on him because he doesn't have so much rubber or wood in his mouth. What are your thoughts on that, John?
It's such a mayhem moment when that fish eats your bait at the side of the boat that if you have the presence of mind to set the hook towards the tail, that is going to increase your hooking percentage. And ideally, even if the bait's coming out of the mouth, then the theory behind that is that the hooks are going to get caught right in the side of the mouth coming out. So, if you see that and you can do that, then kudos to you. If everything's in the right position for that. I'm with Brent. Brent just described it really well. When you watch that fish eat the bait at the side of the boat, after you've watched it a few times, like there's a whole sequence that you see where the fish starts to open its mouth, and when you're looking down on top of it, you see the gills flare, you see the red of the gills. This is all happening in just microseconds, but you see all of this and you watch for the fish to actually clamp on the bait. And and at that point, when that fish has the bait in its mouth, the way Brent described, I just say again, break the rod. Even though it's right at the side of the boat, you still need to set the hooks on that fish. And the reason is that muskies bite down so hard, they put so much bite pressure on it, that with a wooden bait, for example, if like a suic, if they don't get a hold of the hooks with that massive bite, they're holding onto the wood with no hook in them, and you don't set the hook, that fish is just going to let go and swim away. So, that hook set, absolutely, wherever it is, critical all the time.
Yeah. It's funny because the more you experience it, it almost becomes in slow motion at the side of the boat for you because you've seen it enough. Your first few strokes on a boat side maneuver, set the hook as hard as you can to hold on, and the more experience you get with it, the more you'll be able to deal with it and do different things with it, whether it's coming back as we were talking about, but reading that fish. So, this next I got a real quick little video here. This isn't a real big fish by any means. It's actually quite a small fish. But why do we need sharp hooks and solid hook sets? You're going to watch this little fish come out of the water and shake his head. And just imagine it being a bigger fish throwing his head even that much harder. So, I've got it in slow motion here because it happens so fast in real life. That's on a Weagle topwater bait. But you see how fast and how hard he throws his head back and forth there. So that's it just goes to show you if you don't have sharp hooks and you don't have solid hook sets, you're not going to land one of these. Okay, this little video that I got coming up here kind of throws a lot of what we talked about all into perspective. Everywhere from, so I got that Susie sucker on there. I'm going to make a cast. I'm going to come back. The rod's loading up. You know, you can see I'm not working that hard when I make the cast. I engage the spool. I'm working the bait back to the boat. You can see I'm watching in the water behind the boat. Excuse me. This is the first time I actually ever used a GoPro. I had it for probably a year or so before I used it. A little intimidated by technology sometimes. And what happened is I got the GoPro set up. I'm in the back of the boat. And it's a little thing about if you're fishing by yourself, you're actually safer in the back of your boat than you are in the front of the boat. You know, I got the foot control there. A lot of guys like to use the hand control. It's a little more stable back there. It's a beautiful summer morning. I'm watching the fish come to the boat. I make a boat side maneuver. I set the hook. I keep the bait or the fish moving forward. I turn them. You can see my net's behind me there. I got to go back and get the net. But the whole time I'm moving that fish forward and then netting him head first. So let's just watch this, and then we'll break it down a little bit. Well, we can break it down. See that? Not putting much effort into it, letting the rod do the work. Bait hits the water, I get it moving right away. I'm working that swim bait like a jerk bait. Get into the boat. I'm watching in the water. You can see I'm looking down there. Right about there, I see a fish. He eats it. Keep that moving forward. You see I kind of reach out a little bit to help turn them. You got to switch hands because I know my net's behind me. The whole time I'm pulling that fish. I'm keeping pressure on him, moving him forward. Turn him one more time. You can see I only got about 6 inches of line between my leader and the rod tip. And boom, she's in the net. One key thing here, I don't do a lot of trolling. I do have 4 rod holders on the boat at that time for some reason. But I'm fishing by myself, and I do this when I have people there as well. I actually use my rod holders. Let's just back that up a little bit there. Right there. I actually use my rod holder to hold the net. If I have clients out in the boat or friends or we're fishing or whatever, I don't have to get them to hold the net while I get my tools out. Right now, where my left hand is, there's no toolbox here. And my toolbox is in front of that seat at the front of the boat with all my release tools in it. I got my hook cutters, pliers, all that good stuff, Nipex and everything. But I can put that fish in the water. Pardon me, I leave that fish in the water with my net in the rod holder. And that way it's safe. He's not going anywhere. It's like a big live well for you. And we'll get that, finish that off there. Okay, now at the bottom there, you can actually see I got a toolbox where my tools are all out there. I had to cut some hooks on that fish. You know, not the biggest fish in the world, but it was a nice muskie, and it was fun to catch. Get her back in the water. Okay, so releasing a fish. You know, it's great that we can catch fish and everything else. We've got the baits, we've got the rods, the reels, the line, we got everything. The moon's aligned. We're making a perfect cat in a perfect spot. We hook a fish. Okay, we know we're going to want a big net. We just seen a big net there. That net will, you know, you can put it, there's no musky out there that won't fit in that net. I can put it in the rod holder, keep the fish in the water. That fish has just exerted a lot of energy. Even with the hooks in him, he can sit in that net, and he's just going to sit there and relax, kind of regain some of his composure, regain some of his strength. Well, I get my tools and my hook out, my hook cutters and everything ready. Best case scenario, we reach in with a pair of needle nose pliers. We get the hooks out. That's awesome. Doesn't always happen that way. I always have a couple different kinds of pliers. I like short-handled needle nose pliers. I prefer to use those. I have longer ones if I have to get down farther. But your biggest tool that you're going to need after those is a pair of hook cutters. I don't know if there's a better set of hook cutters than Nipex. You can go cut 7/0 hooks with them, no problem. Get in there. Don't go in there and start ripping hooks out. If you're going to be tearing the fish's mouth apart, especially if this things are around the gills, you don't want to be damaging that fish. As John talked about earlier, it takes 30 years. You know, fish can grow up to 30 years. They're not great spawners. They don't have they make up less than 1% of our fish population out there, if I'm not mistaken. So it's very important to, once we do capture one, to treat them nicely, as nice as we can, get those hooks out without ripping stuff. If you got to cut the hooks, quite often after the pressure's off, that little piece will fall out. You know what? It takes 30 years to grow a trophy muskie. It only takes a couple seconds and $1 or less to put a new hook on a bait. So get in there, cut those hooks. Now, once we got the hooks out, proper handling techniques are essential for successful release of a muskie. One thing you don't want to do is hold a muskie vertical. Back in the old days, you used to see a guy with the fish under the gill plate and his tail down by the feet, hanging towards his feet. You're going to damage a lot of the stomach lining there, and you can hurt the vertebrae in the back of the fish. So you want to be very careful the way we handle them. Always support the fish's body. So I always grab one hand under the gill plate and then one hand under the belly. When I'm pulling it out of the net, I even make sure I get my hand under there as fast as I can. On this next slide, there's one of my favorite fishing partners there. That's Lily the Wonder Dog. She's wondering what's going on. So we got, you can see I got one hand under the gill plate. The fish isn't even